Welcome to the weekly edition of the Wrap. I'm Laura Leslie, WRAL Capitol Bureau Chief.
And I am Will Doran, WRAL State Government Reporter.
And it has been some kind of week. For those of you who were under a rock, on Saturday, of course, we had Trump and Haley in the state. And on Friday, we had Kamala Harris in Durham. So if you see a journalist, if you're not one, then they're tired. Be nice to them.
Well, and Tuesday, election night, I went to bed around 2:30 in the morning. I don't know about you.
Yep. Long night. Because, some of the changes that were made by lawmakers last year meant additional delay in getting the results this year. So I think it was a little later than usual for us, because normally you have that early in-person vote. You used to be able to have that already at the beginning of the night, and that would give you some indication of where things were going. But because we didn't have that this year, because it trickled in late, there was a lot of surprises as it came through.
There were. There were no surprises in the big ticket races. Trump cruised to victory. You got Josh Stein and Mark Robinson in the governor's race. Everyone has, expected that for months, if not years, to be this matchup. But, there were some kind of, shockers in some of these races. Obviously, the biggest one was the superintendent of public education. And you have Republican incumbent Catherine Truitt, who got knocked out in the primary, which you never see in a council of state race.
It just doesn't happen. Number one, they almost are never challenged primary-wise, and B, if they are, they certainly don't lose incumbents. Yeah, so that was a real shocker. And I don't think she was expecting it either.
I don't think so. She lost to Michelle Morrow, who is a homeschooling activist from Cary and ran against Truitt from her right. But Truitt raised almost 10 times as much money for that race as Morrow did. But, I think talking to folks, it sounds like, Morrow was just at a lot of really, local grassroots meetings, county Republican clubs, just really pounding the pavement, getting out there and talking to people. And, voters reacted. And, and really kind of a theme that we saw up and down the ballot on Tuesday was voters kind of rejecting the more moderate options, and not even necessarily moderates.
Say establishment. Yeah.
Right, just the more moderate choices. And, on both the right and the left. On the right, it was pretty close to 100% of the races went to kind of the MAGA candidates, people who are most closely affiliated with Donald Trump. But
pretty close, yeah.
On the left, you saw Durham State Senator Mike Woodard lost his primary, which I think was pretty surprising to a lot of people. He's been in Durham politics for 20 years, including the last decade as in the legislature. Michael Ray up in Northampton County, kind of northeastern part of the state, lost his primary to a progressive challenger by 42 votes.
Well, he is one of the several legislators that typically or have often in the past voted with the Republican majority especially on veto overrides. And so I think 4 of them were targeted. The 4 that we're doing, or maybe 5. And he is the only one that actually lost his seat.
Yes. A few of them hung on,
by their
Cunningham.
fingernails. Cecil Brockman, by just a hair.
Yeah, Cecil Brockman, he won his race. I think it was 83 votes is the unofficial count. Some of those other more moderate Democrats like Carly Cunningham, Shelley Willingham, they won pretty easily in their primaries. But, you saw Woodard and Ray get knocked off. And actually the Chamber of Commerce is raising some concerns about this. They mentioned Ray since he's known as a pro-business Democrat. But then they also said this kind of surge of populist MAGA candidates winning on the right. They said these, kind of combined, this is concerning for the state's business climate. And, they put out a statement on Thursday actually saying it was, quote, a startling warning of the coming threats to North Carolina's business climate.
Wow.
So that's the Chamber of Commerce, not usually talking about Republican politicians like that, but they are not too pleased with what they saw on Tuesday.
Well, and some of the races that they cited, for example, the Labor Department, the Commissioner of Labor. So that was going to be, we all had expected John Hardister to get that because he's a really experienced politician. He's got money. He's been campaigning hard. And Luke Farley beat him handily. And Luke Farley is another kind of political newcomer. Who has, probably did much the same thing as Morrow, probably spent a lot of time. Because, primaries are basically the last place left where retail politics really works, right?
Exactly.
Because, you don't, in a general, you need money. You got to talk to all the voters. But, you can get it. If you walk into your local GOP or Democratic caucus meeting, those are the people who are going to go to the election, right, to the primary. You can pretty much count on it, right?
Yeah, we only had 24% turnout in the primary, and so if you consider that that's split between Republicans and Democrats, that means only about 10% on average of each party's kind of most dedicated activists actually showed up.
Yeah, exactly. So you can really target those folks, and I think that's what we know. That's what Michelle Morrow did, and I think that's probably what Farley did as well.
Yeah.
Another shocker for me was George Cleveland.
Yeah.
Who's been in the legislature for 20 years now.
20 years.
Is challenged and was beaten by a newcomer who I think was a former president of a college chapter of Turning Point.
He's a current college student. He's a junior. He's a junior in college. He beat a 20-year legislator out on the coast. And I think Onslow County is that.
It's hard to imagine a world in which George Cleveland is not sufficiently conservative.
Yeah. For as long as I've been covering the state legislature, he's been one of the most conservative people there, but he just lost to a challenger who challenged him from the right.
It's very, very surprising. And then we also saw another incumbent,
Kevin Crutchfield.
Who lost too.
In the Charlotte suburbs. And, he's actually, kind of coming back, to these concerns that the chamber's been raising. He's a CEO of a small business and was, I think, the co-chair of the Small Business Caucus in the legislature. And he lost to a guy, Brian Echevarria, who's he's worked as a Christian minister before. He's worked in construction. And he took some heat for hiring a guy to run his campaign with ties to the Proud Boys. And so that was the choice that voters had in that primary. Do we want, this guy who's hiring Proud Boys to run his campaign, or do we want this business executive? And voters said, we don't want the business executive.
That's amazing to me. But anyway, so we have some interesting races shaping up for the fall. It will be interesting to see what this turn toward the right means in the context of the general election. I know, as you wrote a story about this.
Yeah. I've spoken with people, and everyone agrees it's obvious that in 2022, Republicans were really hurt if they were tied to Donald Trump and to election denialism and to just kind of the MAGA movement. We saw it across the country. If Republicans kind of ran as a MAGA candidate, they tended to lose their races in 2022. And, right now in these primaries, Republicans just went full MAGA. So, do Democrats have maybe a reason to be a little optimistic about their chances here in November? I think some people are feeling good on the Democratic side about their chances, but on the other hand, Trump was not on the ballot in 2022. Right. And there are a whole lot of voters who Trump has proven he can bring them to the polls when he's on the ballot, and they're not going to vote otherwise.
Yeah, I think Democrats need to worry more about getting their own people to the polls.
Yeah.
Because that seems to be a serious enthusiasm gap there as well.
Yeah, well, let's take a quick break, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about some of the races looking ahead to November that we are most interested in watching for.
And welcome back to this week's Wrap. I'm Laura Leslie, WRAL Capitol Bureau Chief.
And I am Will Doran, State Government Reporter.
And we are looking ahead to next November and some of the races that we're going to be looking at. You had flagged the Labor Commissioner race as particularly interesting.
Yeah, we talked about that a little bit earlier. Luke Farley winning on the GOP side. He ran on a campaign of Make Elevators Great Again. Because, for most people in North Carolina, what you know about the labor commissioner is they are in charge of inspecting the elevators. You see their photo in the elevator, and, they do other things too. They investigate OSHA complaints. They are in charge of actually making sure that fare rides are safe, but the elevator is kind of the main thing. So he campaigned on Make Elevators Great Again.
Okay, and he's going to be up against Braxton Winston, right?
Correct. Former Charlotte City Councilman who rose to political fame as a Black Lives Matter activist. There's like a viral photo of him protesting at a police line in 2020, and he kind of rode that to fame. So you've got these two candidates who really
could
kind of
not be more different.
could not be more different. And have obviously not only their personal lives but their political views as well. Just very stark differences. So voters are going to have to choose there whether they want the kind of the far right or the far left, or however you might say. But I think that's going to be a really interesting one to watch.
Another really interesting one to watch, I think, is going to be that AG race, because you've got Jeff Jackson, Dan Bishop. They're both smart lawyers. They're both congressmen. They're both leaving Congress. And
2 sitting U.S. representatives running for state AG. I don't know that that's ever happened anywhere in the country.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. But they've both got tons of money. And there's going to be a lot of money flowing in, and it's going to get ugly.
And they've both got a national profile. That's the thing. I mean, both of these guys aren't just well known here in North Carolina.
Right.
They've got national followings and have, raised millions of dollars, served in the state Senate together. They're both from Charlotte and very much dislike one another.
Yeah.
And I think this is going to be a really, really nasty race.
Yeah, and then also Steve Troxler has what appears to be an actual serious challenger this year on the Democratic side. That's Dr. Sarah Tabor, I believe, or Sarah Tabor is her name. Fundraising, as you pointed out, more than all the Democrats in the last 20 years put together.
Yeah, that really caught my eye. She said that on Thursday that she has raised more money than every Democrat who's run for ag commissioner since 2004. Combined.
Well, I think that's because since Troxler won, which was 2004, there's been an acceptance, that he's kind of got this thing, locked.
And I got to say, I'm not ever going to be betting against Steve Troxler. I think he won more votes than anyone else on the ballot in 2020, 2016, probably every election he's been on the ballot before that. I mean, the man is popular.
The man is popular, yeah. So I don't think they've ever really had a serious challenge to him, but it sounds like she might be.
It sounds like this could be a serious challenge this year. And the other one, one thing we're not really talking about is the congressional races, and that's because we've got 14 seats for Congress. 13 of them just got decided on Tuesday.
Right. Well, 12, because there's one that is not quite decided yet.
Oh, true. There is a runoff in the 13th district.
Yeah, there's a runoff in the 13th district.
Right,
so if you're really tired of those Daughtry and Knott commercials, sorry. You're going to see some more because that's May 14th. And this is for all the marbles, because this person is almost certainly going to go to Congress because this district is so Republican heavy. So this is really for the big game here.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We've got 10 deep red districts here in North Carolina. We've got 3 deep blue districts, and we've got 1 toss-up.
Right, and that's the Lori Buckhout. She won over Sandy Smith, much to the relief of the Republican establishment, I'm sure, perhaps sort of flipping the trend on other races that we've been talking about.
Exactly. That was kind of the one race where the MAGA candidate lost, and that was because Republicans spent a lot of money and effort, the Republican establishment, making sure that Sandy Smith did not win that primary. Yeah. And then it went to Lori Buckhout instead. And she's going to take on Democratic Representative Don Davis. They're both veterans. Davis he was a moderate when he was in the state legislature. He's been a moderate in Congress. And that's going to be kind of, I think, a bellwether district. Probably whoever wins the presidential race, that party is also going to win this race. But, we'll see. Could one of them, manage to run ahead of the other party and flip that seat? We'll have to wait and see.
We should have mentioned that we just skipped over the runoffs. So we're still having the runoff in 13, and you pointed out also that there are a couple other runoffs out there for auditor.
For auditor, lieutenant governor, which are both statewide races in the Republican side, and then also for the 6th district congressional seat. And that's like the Greensboro area seat.
That's Pat Harrigan and...
No, that's Mark Walker and Addison McDowell.
That's right.
And I think that's a really fascinating runoff that you've got there, because Mark Walker obviously is a former congressman, served kind of in Republican leadership. He was chair of the Study Caucus, which is, a pretty large conservative group up on Capitol Hill. But McDowell has the key Trump endorsement. And if you thought turnout on Tuesday was low, turnout in this runoff is going to be super low. So will voters want, the candidate who's been there before, who has a track record, or do they want the newcomer who's got the Trump endorsement? That's going to be the big question, and I think, will probably be pretty telling of, what voters want to see, not just in this Greensboro district, but kind of everywhere around the state.
Yeah. Anyway, looking ahead a little bit to next week, there's a bunch of oversight. It's oversight week, as I like to call it. A lot of committees coming in to meet. There's also a skeleton session next week. There's no votes expected, although I haven't checked to see if that's changed. But at least at this point, as far as we know, no. The short session will begin in earnest in April.
Yes. Now that the races are done, we can get back to governing. And
if there's a couple of lame ducks out there, you never know. That tends to change some things sometimes.
Yeah. We'll have to see what kind of votes. I expect Republicans will probably run some sort of bill on immigration, since that is going to be such a big issue in the elections this year, and probably run something that they can message on, get some Democrats to either vote for or against something that can go into some ads. But there's a lot of other stuff that kind of held over from last year's session that could pop back up in this short session. So I think it's just going to be a question of do people want to stay around for a few months and really debate some big policy issues, or do they just want to
go home and campaign,
revamp the budget, get it done, and go back and start raising money and campaigning for their races in November?
My guess is the latter, but what'll probably happen is the former, because that's what it always does, right? There's I wish I had $1 for every time I say, oh, it's going to be a short session. Yeah, right. There's one time it was true. That was Tom Tillis back in 2011.
Who did not have a good election night on Tuesday. He wasn't on the ballot, but he had endorsed Bill Graham for governor, who ended up coming in third. So has been censured by the state GOP too. So changing times in the Republican Party.
Anyway, thank you for joining us, and we will catch you next week here on The Wrap.